We're going to be embarking on this journey to learn a little bit more about San Francisco Reparations Committee and what is being done and how you can get involved. And before we get there, I want to invite a welcome from our host of the Center for Social Justice, and I'm going to turn this over to Gled Muse so that he can tell us a little bit more about what we're going to be doing with the land acknowledgement and the Center for Social Justice today.
Thank you so much, Paula. My name is Gulad once again. I am the Community Education and Engagement Manager with the Center for Social Justice. I'm really glad to be sharing the space with you all for such an important informational. Just like with all of our events, we start off with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First People.
Good. I want to acknowledge that this program is a collaboration between the Center for Social Justice, the Glide Racial Justice Team, and the San Francisco Human Rights Reparations Committee. And we have a wonderful lineup for you, but I'd like to introduce the folks who you'll be hearing from today. I myself am Paula Farmer. I am the facilitator for Glide's Racial Justice Group, and Reparations is one of our 6-pronged initiatives. And I work very closely with Freddie Martin, who is part of the racial justice team, along with many other things. Freddie was born and raised here in San Francisco, and he loves this city. He is African-American, a part of the African-American community, and has supported and nurtured and enhanced, that community has supported, nurtured, and enhanced Freddie's growth over these last 53 years that he's lived here. And Glide Memorial Church and its social services have been also key in that growth. He has been active in the community, organizing for the past 10 years, specifically in tenant housing and ensuring that tenants' rights, services, and affordable housing are available to all who need it. Freddie currently works as a senior health and wellness coordinator at Juell Stewart, at the Juell Stewart San Francisco Human Rights.
Booker T. Washington Community Service Center.
Thank you, because that I was like, oh, Juell got her own thing. Okay, but you know, I'll give it. And so that said, I would also like to highlight Juell Stewart, who does not have her own community service center. However, Juell is a program manager at San Francisco Human Rights Commission, where she works on the Dream Keepers initiative, and she serves as a staff secretary for the SF African American Reparations Committee. And while Juell is originally from Chicago, her thirst for vibrant urban culture led her from the Midwest to the East Coast to her current home in San Francisco, where she's been since 2015. Juell holds a master's degree in city and regional planning from the University of Pennsylvania, and she is passionate about finding innovative ways to reallocating resources to Black communities. So those are the folks from which you will hear today. Freddie, do you have anything before I turn this over to Juell?
Oh, thank you for that wonderful welcome and introduction. I just wanted to say that the work that I do at Booker T. Washington Community Service Center is directly related to this. It's the oldest established Black-owned, led, and centered nonprofit in San Francisco. And I did get the okay at the last minute to, say that I'm also representing Booker T here. It's been an amazing process. Paula, I don't know, did you give yourself an introduction, or did you want me to do that?
If you want to know who I am.
Okay. So Paula Farmer is also with the Berkeley School. Paula Farmer is currently the Director of Community and Belonging at the Berkeley School. I love that title. In her work, she is committed to developing dialogues about equity and inclusion practices that consider the individual in the context of institutional culture in order to realize a diverse community that thrives together. A native of Dallas, Texas, Paula has lived and worked in the Bay Area for 17 years. She is active in many civic organizations, including Glide Memorial Church, where she is currently a lay leader. She also facilitates the Glide Racial Justice Group and the Glide Reads Book Club, and is supportive of the work of the Glide Foundation, and a wonderful facilitator and host as well.
Excellent. And I see that from the audience, what's in the waterfall in the chat is that there is the whole gamut, from Juell's experience of migrating here from Chicago, my experience of migrating here for work from Dallas by way of Chicago. Chicago has some kind of connection there. And Freddie, born and raised in the Bay, Miguel, born and raised in the Mission. We have it all in this chat. So please continue to populate that. We would love to see who's in the room. And even if you are not from the states proper, that actually matters in this space, because it's all about who gets to live and thrive in the Bay. So I'm going to turn this over to Juell, and she will take it from there.
Thank you so much, Paula. While I adjust my screen, it's so great to be here tonight amongst everyone, and on behalf of the Reparations Advisory Committee. Yeah, thank you for hosting us, and I am of course, representing the committee from my standpoint as a staff member, but I want to elevate and recognize the committee themselves, which is 15 passionate people who are committed to bringing reparations to San Francisco. And I believe the chair, Eric McDonald, is in attendance tonight. And so glad to see everybody this evening. Before we get started, in every reparations meeting, we actually have an ancestral appreciation acknowledgement that mirrors or echoes the land acknowledgement that we did to start off this meeting. And I just wanted to take some time to acknowledge this because it's very central to how we operate within the committee. So we honor the gifts, resilience, and sacrifices of our Black ancestors, particularly those who toiled the land and built the institutions that established this city's wealth and freedom, but never compensated or fully realizing their own sovereignty. We acknowledge this exploitation of not only labor, but of our humanity, and through this process are working to repair some of the harms done by public and private actors. Because of their work, we are here and will invest in the descendants of their legacy. Thank you. So here's a little stock thing that I always put in to talk about myself, but you know, we already said that. I'm very proud to work at the Human Rights Commission and on the Dreamkeeper Initiative, and of course, reparations. So the whole impetus of this presentation is whether you're new to the to bring everybody on the same accord. So whether you're new to the conversation or whether you've been to a few Reparations Advisory Committee meetings, I wanted to offer some background on why reparations are necessary, what the committee does, and what we're looking forward to in the coming months as the committee embarks on this very powerful work. So first and foremost, Black people have a long, vibrant legacy in San Francisco. And I always want to start out with centering that because it gets lost in modern discourse sometimes, and people forget about that, but I want to center that because we are here and we're gonna continue to be here because of so many people who came before us. And so the real population influx, and I'm sure many people who are on this call may have had family members who migrated here during World War II, where there was a significant influx of African Americans. I'm not gonna go too far into history, but I think it's important to offer this context. So please bear with me, even if you're not a history buff. So from between 1940 and 1950, the Black population in San Francisco, really exploded as a result of that employment influx. And so there was a point where, and this isn't even the height of the Black population. So you see, then, maybe folks know this, but in the Fillmore started getting very, very popular and vibrant. It became the Harlem of the West throughout the 30s and 50s. And the 10-block radius surrounding Fillmore had hotels, jazz clubs, restaurants, and a lot of the institutions were Black owned and definitely catered to a Black clientele, because there was a Black population center of Black people in Bayview, Hunters Point, primarily during that time. A lot of the establishments around the city did not allow Black people in and did not cater to us. And so the Fillmore was a haven for Black folks, and it became the center of the Black community in a lot of ways in the city. And then we see a big thing that happened called redevelopment. And this was a very, very bad, contentious era in San Francisco history. I think many people are familiar with these maps. These are redlining maps, and they're, I was going to say how many people are familiar with them, but if you're not familiar with them, basically these are maps that the federal government kind of backed in banks that showed where people could buy homes, basically, and like where the most risky residential investments were. So if you were looking at property in the that's all green, and that's not as risky. This is a grading scale. But the places where you see red are where lenders would not mortgage lenders wouldn't lend to people to buy homes there. And it just so happened in most of those red areas, well, it didn't just so happen, it was intentional. In those red areas, those are where much of the Black population lived, and also where most of the Black population were allowed to buy homes. And so those areas were not seen as risky investments. Therefore, there were fewer mortgages, and the people were not, the housing values were not as high. So anyway, so in the 1940s, the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency started, and they had a whole report about blight and taxes, which proposed urban renewal in the Western Addition. And so along with the Federal Housing Act of 1949, cities across the US, including and especially San Francisco, embarked on these urban renewal projects, which would take large swaths of large blocks of property and raise them and try to create new developments. And so by the 1950s, much of the population was concentrated in the Western Addition and the Fillmore. And then urban renewal evictions began in 1958. So, and then by 1960, a lot of residents, 8,000, primarily Black and Japanese, were displaced by the city from a 28-block radius. And the reason I go into this, it's not just because I'm an urban planning dork of some sort, but it helps. But I also want to point out the very intentional nature, the institutionalized nature of what happened. And that brings me back to why reparations why the Reparations Committee is so critical and so needed, is because the city of San Francisco and the state of California and the United States of America have all enacted policy that contributed to Black folks being pushed out. And it was very deliberate, and it wasn't a myth. If you look at the old planning documents, you see that it was intentional strategy to bring more affluent people into urban areas to remove the blight, which was kind of like a code word for undesirable people, many of whom look like me. So you see you know, even as this was going on in the background, between 1960 and 1970, the Black population still rose, and 1970 was its highest point in San Francisco when we had 13% of residents were Black, about 96,000 Black people. So that must have been an interesting time. But this is another photo of redevelopment, and you can see the scale of the destruction. And I'm not sure exactly where that is. I think that if I spent some time looking, I could figure that out, but suffice it to say that it looks completely different now. But here's an interesting quote. One of the purposes of renewal when it was called slum clearance was not only to get rid of the people and the structures, but to make sure those blighting influences didn't come back. There was no intent to rebuild for the kind of people who were being displaced. And this was the former director of the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency, the deputy executive director, who said this. And so again, this just reinforces that intentional nature of what was being done to our communities. Oh, yeah, so I just had this again. So you can see, you know, historical maps are one thing. Sometimes they're frozen in the past and we look at these and say, oh, okay, well, that's in the past. We don't have redlining anymore. We don't have that exact policy. But when you go and deliberately displace people and tear down their residents and their communities, it has a lasting effect, as we still see today. So I just wanted to give a scale of how the Black population has gone down from that height of 1970 to the last census in 2020, which was about 48,000 or 5.5% of the population. So why reparations? Yet again. So those structural challenges and that we saw in previous years has had a cumulative effect today. And these statistics, you know, I think a lot of people have seen them, but just to reinforce reinforce what we're working with, the median income for Black households in SF is less than 1/4 of that of white households. And you know, what does that look like in raw numbers? The median income in San Francisco is $104,000. But for Black people, we have the lowest median income in the city. And these sorts of things, it's not because these are structural things. This is not because Black people are inherently going to earn less. These are the accumulation of policy, discrimination, racism, all of these things together. And I'm just, you know, I'm reinforcing this because you just have to, like, it's not you know, I just like to reinforce it because it's necessary and it's true. So back to why we're embarking on this reparations, the reparations committee's goals is because we're addressing structural institutional harms. We're accounting for the unpaid debt to Black communities. There's a moral imperative to create policy that benefits Black communities because of that history that I just talked about. And most critically, there's a once in a generation opportunity to close the racial wealth gap that we see before us. And so so now I'm going to go into, that was a little bit of background and some details like attached to history about why we're embarking on this journey. And here's some background about the Reparations Committee itself. It was proposed by D10 Supervisor President Shaman Walton and adopted by the full board in December of 2020. And it's a 15-member committee that was formally appointed by the Board of Supervisors in May 2021. And they held their first meeting last June. So we've almost been at this for a year. And the timeline, we have some milestones. The first meeting, of course, and then we submitted a plan in December 2021 that was about research, outreach, and other efforts that the committee wanted to undertake. And then a year later, this December, we're going to submit a draft plan to the Board of Supervisors based on the outreach opportunities and engagement that we're doing in different communities throughout this year. Then in next June, there's going to be a final plan presented to the Board of Supervisors, and then finally the committee sunsets in January of 2024. I'm just, blown away by that. So the main objective was, is the purpose of the advisory committee is to advise the Board of Supervisors, Mayor, the Human Rights Commission, and the public on the development of the reparations plan that chronicles the legacy of American chattel slavery, post-Civil War government-sanctioned discrimination against African Americans, and ongoing institutional discrimination that has prevented the enslaved and their descendants from fully benefiting from the growth of the U.S. economy, with an emphasis on systemic city-sanctioned discrimination that has adversely impacted the lives of Black San Franciscans. That is a lot. That is a lot. And that is a huge scope and a huge undertaking. I just want people, I want to recognize that. And it's no easy feat, even with the 15 brilliant minds that we have on the committee. It's, the committee is doing this, but it's also a community effort. And that's why we're, kicking off this outreach and engagement process as well, because we want to hear, we need input and we need engagement from everybody who might be able to contribute to completing such an audacious goal. So here are committee members, and each committee member was chosen because of their, each seat was developed with specific kinds of traits in mind. And so each committee member who was appointed because they fit into those roles. So I won't read them all off, but we have people who have experience with the impact of redevelopment in the Fillmore and the Western Addition, people who are who have been displaced, people who have backgrounds in academia. We have someone who works in the technology sector, someone who is a parent or a caregiver, and then we have youth representation on the committee as well. So those are the 15 brilliant minds that are on there. And we have 4 subcommittees. It's economic empowerment, education, health, and policy. And each one is led by a different subcommittee lead, and they hold meetings on a regular basis as well. And so I'm just going to go into each subcommittee. And by the way, we have a website, sfreparations.org, that can give you more information about the subcommittees and including contact information and when those subcommittees meet. So economic empowerment focuses on quantifying Black economic loss in 4 primary areas: guaranteed income, spatial justice and housing, Black business growth and sustainability, and then job creation, attainment, and equitable pay. The Education Committee, as you can expect, addresses the educational disparities that affect Black students across SF and are really focused on elevating these kinds of strategies and models that we can adopt in San Francisco that have worked other places to successfully center Black youth within the education program and minimize educational inequities. The Health Subcommittee, extremely important in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, but is concerned with thinking through the disparities in health outcomes that disproportionately affect us. And by the way, I'll say our next committee meeting is May 9th at 5:30 p.m. and it's going to be spotlighting Black health. And we have a few guests that will be there to speak about that. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And then last but certainly not least is our policy subcommittee, who's charged with developing policy and legislative priorities that center reparations for African Americans that can be implemented as part of the SF City Charter. They have been engaging in this ongoing work and, really like biting off a lot. Like the subcommittee meetings are open to the public, and I think that the subcommittee leads will be really excited to have more participation in those meetings, and just more thought partnership and people who are contributing like their expertise. So the main meetings though meet on the, actually I should change that because it's actually the second Monday of the month. but so the next one is May 9th, and the subcommittee is very, yeah. So, and then you can register to you can register for the next meeting at that bit.ly link right there, which is case sensitive. So the next steps that we have with the committee are, this is the phase of community outreach and engagement. We are partnering with different organizations like GLIDE. Thank you so much for hosting us, and different organizations that are doing work within the community. So the committee members are going to be hosting ongoing opportunities for engagement now through the end of the year. So you can keep an eye out for those, and also please email reparations@sfgov.org if you're part of an organization that can host outreach events. We would love to link up with you and be able to bring our committee members to speak. You know, like a lot of committee members have interest in coming to other organizations and, you know, giving a 10-minute spiel about reparations and then doing an engagement project. And this is the conclusion of my presentation, actually. So thank you very much. And I feel like I sped through that, but I am happy to accept any questions right now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Juell. So if you have questions that have come up for you as you've looked through this very thorough, I will say, presentation, go ahead and plug those into the chat. And they don't have to necessarily do with what you've seen in this presentation, but it could also be about what you didn't see or what you didn't feel like you got answered. So go ahead and start populating that. But Juell, I would like to get us started off with one of the questions that is popular as we do these information sessions is, why is this the first time I'm hearing of this? Like, how is the outreach going, and what can people do to further help get the word out about this wonderful work that is being done on behalf of African descendants of slaves?
That is a great question. Thank you so much. I think, actually, should I stop screen sharing? I guess I don't. Yeah, thank you for that. I think that as much as, you know, we have been doing outreach and engagement, I think one big thing is that everything for the first, like up until a couple of months ago, everything has been via Zoom. And so meetings, which is actually like actually a great opportunity for people to be involved. You know, come to a Zoom meeting, it's a little bit easier than going in person. But you know, to the question, why is this the first time I've heard of it? I'm not sure, but I would love for people to be more involved. And so I'm always happy to add people to our mailing list. If you email reparations@sfgov.org to learn more, then you will be in the loop. And you can also follow our Instagram where we post meeting information, which is SF Reparations, and stay in the loop. And so I'm as heartbroken as I always am that people have not heard about it before, there's so much time for people to be involved right now. So, and then attending the subcommittee meetings is a good idea too. And I see a question in the chat, and you know, I want to address this. I've been to a few meetings and it seems like they take very little public comment. And I do understand that critique. The committee is, you know, it's a government body, and there are limitations on how much, you know, on what public comment looks like in those meetings. And that's why we're really, you know, it's a 2-minute limit, and then we have an agenda to get through as well. And so we want to be able to take everybody's responses. And that's why I think this public engagement and outreach process is so vital, because we can have actual conversations with people in a way that can be a little bit limited within the scope of the standing meeting. So I do understand that though.
Thank you for answering that way, Juell. I see a question from Joyce in the chat, and I think I can take this one. It says, how can we connect Black church members with Reparations Committee? Well, you can talk to any one of us here that's on this Zoom right now, but this is a role that I played in this, and this is what it's going to take. Black church members, Black non-church members, people in the community, your neighbors, people at your school, anywhere. The way to connect them is to let them know about this information that you're getting today. Tell them about what's happening, tell them when the meetings are, send them the links. We're gonna continue to put some of the information as to how you could get connected to the meetings. I believe the next larger or full council meeting was canceled. It was supposed to be yesterday, but they sent an email out that it's going to be next Monday. Am I correct? That's May 2nd or?
It's on May 9th, actually.
May 9th. Oh, that's the one that you talked about earlier. So yeah, so just stay connected. Put your information in the chat if we don't have it, your email, your phone number, and we will get back to you. Guled, as the manager for Center for Social Justice, will be responding to everyone, everyone that came to this meeting and that registered. And one last thing that I want to say is let as many Black and brown people that you know about this. Just tell them, word of mouth. That's how I found out about it. I was talking about it. Someone at another organization sent me the information. And stay connected, because we need and we want to hear everyone's voice. It's so important at this point.
I'd also like to acknowledge that the chair of the committee, Eric McDonald, is in the space as well. And so we want to welcome him and also invite him up if he wants to answer any questions. It's interesting that Freddie, you said Black and brown people, and I wanted to go a little bit into, if we could, I know one of the meetings was also postponed because of the zoning crisis that is happening in San Francisco. And I wanted to know how that is having an impact on the work, if it is having an impact on the work that we're doing, why people should be aware of what is happening there. And then also, how are the committees defining, or have we started to define, who gets to benefit from this conversation?
Great questions, all of those questions. So yeah, first of all, redistricting has been a huge issue across Black San Francisco. And it's because, I think one of your questions was, what impact does it have on the work? And because redistricting happens every 10 years and it affects and it has the potential at least to affect who represents those areas. It's been, hotly contested because different communities were taken out of, like historically Black communities were basically carved out and separated. And so if you don't have that strong base of Black population in a city where we're seeing ourselves get marginalized more and more, then there's concern that we won't have Black representation and that there won't be anyone at the Board of Supervisors to advocate on behalf of Black people. And that could be disastrous for, the reason that this whole committee came about, and other parts of what's happening in the city, like the Dreamkeeper Initiative came about, is because of Black leadership. And so San Francisco that carves out like the mechanisms for Black leadership to be at the forefront could put that in jeopardy. And the committee, the committee members, I should say that the committee members are very active outside of the committee as well. And so one of the reasons we had to postpone and ultimately cancel that is because the committee members themselves, outside of their capacity as being on our committee, are in different roles within the community advocating for redistricting, or, for some of the different redistricting maps. And so we thought it was important to give them that space to be able to do that. And we're hoping to host a conversation within there's another body within Black San Francisco called Mega Black. And I think that they will host a redistricting sort of post-mortem conversation and talk about what the implications are and what advocacy opportunities there may be. And was there another question? Sorry.
Who gets to benefit? Like, how are we defining who will be considered reparations?
Right. Thank you for that. Our body has not decided. We have not had that conversation yet with who is about eligibility quite yet. But the
And
state
see-
committee has.
Oh, I see that. You said who has?
The California Statewide Reparations Committee.
And how are they defining that?
So they had they had two choices. One was lineage based, which is proving that you have an ancestral connection to actually to slavery, that one of your ancestors was actually enslaved. And they were deciding between that lineage based and race based, which is just that if you are Black, you are eligible. They decided to go with the lineage based option, with the reasoning being that I think Prop 209, the one that says that you can't discriminate on the basis of race, they were saying that it wouldn't pass that test at the state level. And so they opted to go with the lineage-based route instead, which would require people to prove that lineage.
And I'm wondering if you could differentiate for the people who are not aware what it means to go from the local to the state to the national, and how all the different political factions factor into what gets done and what doesn't get done.
Another great question. Yeah. Well, how can I fully explain this? So I think that, for one thing, I think that we have the ability to be more agile on the local level, on the municipal level, because a few things. I think that ours, we have more, like the things that I talked about in the beginning of that presentation are so obvious and so quantifiable in a way. And that's another thing that we're embarking on, like researching exactly how much is that, like how much opportunity we've lost, numerically. But we have that, so we have the ability to be more agile with that. And then at the state level, the state reparations committee they're kind of like, they've been doing the same sorts of meetings that we have on this whole time. So I think the state level, that's a really good question, because I'm like, the state level has the ability to be a little bit more agile than the national level. The national level, there are several federal reparations proposals that have been on the table in the past. But I think that what's going to happen, and even you see institutions like Harvard announced today that they're committing $100 million to studying and making reparations, which I don't think that nearly is approaching enough. But I think that you're going to see institutions and cities grapple with it. There's been a couple of other cities, like Evanston, Illinois, did reparations in a certain way, and I think Asheville, North Carolina. The smaller sorts of municipalities, institutions are going to grapple with it. And then we're the first state. The statewide commission is the first, the California one is the first one. And so it's still to be seen how that's going to play out, because California is pretty unique, kind of a unique outlier, because it was never technically a slave holding state, so it's going to look different here in the West than it will in the South or anywhere like that. So I don't know, like, it's an interesting question and something that I think about quite a bit, but I don't have like a defined, like, what is this going to look like, because everybody is still grappling with it, except maybe Evanston, who did housing reparations. They started out with that. So it's still very much in progress.
I see one question in the chat, and then there's another one that I will ask. Will Hall asks, can we send a recommendation for the reparations, and who can we send it to?
Sure, we love to hear feedback, and you can send it. I'll just put my email address in the chat, and you can send it to me, please do.
And I just want to say Juell will answer you back and quick too, despite all the stuff she has to do. So the next question is interesting. Does it matter if using the word Black versus African American when thinking about this work? And how does multiracial identity that includes African American affect this or fit into this?
Oh, great question. Another amazing question. Yes, so this is something that I have, thought about in different contexts previous to coming here. I tend to use the word Black just because African American, there are so many. It's a more expansive definition than African American. I use that most of the time when I'm talking about Black people. When I'm talking about Black people, I say Black instead of African American. But as it relates to this work, I think that there is a specific consideration and nuance there, because there is the argument that everybody, regardless of whether you're African American, if you are Haitian American, if you are Cameroonian American or something, and you're here and you still experience the same sort of discrimination that we all experience the same sort of discrimination just by virtue of the fact that we live in an anti-Black world broadly. And so I think there is some nuance with that. And I think that there is some, Afrocentric, there you go. I think there is still some debate in the popular discourse surrounding that because of that unique question of lineage or race. There are African descendants of slaves, ADOS is a very popular movement that within the reparations discourse that is seeking to specifically limit reparations to African descendants of slaves. But then there's another, another segment who says, why should we narrow it to that scope when, as I said, everybody's experiencing that kind of anti-Black discrimination? So yes, there is some difference in using those, but we as a committee have not landed, or not we, the committee, of which I am honored to work alongside and support, has not developed that a clear distinction quite yet.
Thank you. Those were good answers. I want to acknowledge someone who is here as well, Stephanie Garcia. I think she put an introduction in the chat. She is with the SF Human Rights Commission Dreamkeeper Initiative. Thank you for being here. And the Dreamkeepers Initiative, if you don't know about it, Google it. It's really important. It has a lot to do with the movements that have been happening in San Francisco. And Juell, I think you can probably give a good example of the difference between Dreamkeepers Initiative and the Reparations Advisory Committee.
Yes, thanks for teeing up for me. And hello, Stephanie, good to see you here. And I see the inaugural director of the Dreamkeeper Initiative, Saida Leatutufu Birch, is also here. So thank you for being here and thank you for supporting. Yes, so that's another thing. Sometimes the Dreamkeeper Initiative and reparations get conflated. And though they are, the Dreamkeeper Initiative seeks to reinvest $60 million annually into the Black community to, I'm on a different mode right now, so I can't remember all the pillars right now of the Dreamkeeper Initiative, but suffice it to say, health, wellness, holistic happiness and creativity, all those things to make sure the Black community is thriving. That is a separate, initiative than reparations. And it is an attempt to, make some correct some municipal infrastructure challenges that have plagued the Black community specifically. And so we are happy that we have the Dreamkeeper Initiative, but we don't want people to conflate it with reparations, because then they'll be like, and I've heard this feedback before, well, we already We already gave you guys like $120 million. Isn't that it? But no, it's not. It's not the same thing. We're really excited about the Dream Keeper initiative because it gives a chance for Black-led and Black-centering, Black-serving organizations to get the support that they need to be pillars of the community. But reparations is going to be a more comprehensive sort of, and a much larger financial investment. Well, I can't say that for sure, but I would assume that it's a much larger financial investment that is more comprehensive and dynamic than Dreamkeeper is, which is only one initiative, right? You know.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Can you talk a little bit more about how this whole study is being funded and how people can get involved with supporting, whether that be financially or if that is through action or deed?
Yes, that's a great question. This is, an advisory committee, so it's not funded. This stage is not funded per se. One of the challenges with the committee will be to, think a little bit about the funding the funding mechanisms that will perhaps be able to, that could potentially be used for reparations. Like, for example, I'll just give an example. Evanston, Illinois, they use their recreational cannabis sale taxes to fund their reparations initiative. And so things like that, thinking through that, we haven't quite gotten there. So you asked about the funding and how people can get involved. And so people can get involved by, joining the subcommittees or going to subcommittee meetings, which I'll refer you to the website to go to. I think that Guleb will send out a follow-up, and coming to the meetings, and then also being a part of the outreach and engagement that we're embarking on, which we will be, releasing a calendar of those opportunities as we develop them.
Oh, and also as part of that funding, I meant also, how is this committee work being funded currently? Where's that coming from?
Through the HRC, yeah. But I think you also asked, could people like contribute? We don't have a mechanism to do that quite yet, but perhaps we will if that's something that people are interested in the future.
Great. Paula, I think you touched on this question earlier. You might have asked it, just stop me if you already did. How is the SF committee being impacted by other reparations work going on around the country? And how is this playing out? Like, how is that affecting the local work that we're doing here?
Well, certainly we have an eye out on we've consulted with like the people who spearheaded the Evanston campaign. I've been, doing research about what's going on, and it impacts us. It has affected us because we're always looking at models and seeing comparable things, because, the way that city government tends to work is that people want to see the outcomes, what worked elsewhere. Even though San Francisco is very innovative as a city, there's still that, everybody likes to see what worked other places to see how it might work here. So I think we are also more than comfortable with being innovators. So we want to, what we've always said in the back of our mind, I think, is that we want to serve as a model for other cities. Like, I would love to see Chicago embark on a reparations committee and like plan and stuff too. We also are, affiliated with the California statewide reparations committee. And so I go to those meetings and see what's going on there. And there's also a few different like groups that do reparations work across the country, like in Cobra. And there's also, I just remember there's I think Marin County is doing reparations. They're like in the very beginning stages of it. And also there's going to be a reparations gathering in the East Bay in a few weeks that was brought to my attention. So we try to be, now that we can be in different we can be in space with each other. I think that the committee is really passionate about, going and building those connections, especially locally, like, going to this Oakland event that's going on and like really trying to build alliances because that makes us so much more stronger regionally. I'm gonna put this Eventbrite link in the chat for the listening session that's going on in Oakland in case anybody wants to join that, and it's on May 28th on a Saturday.
I think you hit on something that's very telling in the cities that you talked about, like Evanston, Illinois. If you go there now, it's a very progressive city, has Black historical roots, a lot of displacement due to university and housing that is there. And when you go, yet and still, you can see it's a Black space. Same thing with Asheville, North Carolina. So one of the questions from Val Feldman is, given how many Black residents of San Francisco have been systematically displaced over the decades, how does the Reparations Committee take into account Black San Franciscans who are no longer in SF because of that displacement?
Great question. And I can tell you that's been an ongoing discussion as well. One huge mechanism that the committee has explored and made like even, made appeals to the city government about is the Certificate of Preference program, which during the urban renewal displacement, they displaced like 10,000 Black folks and gave them these certificates that said, okay, well, we will let you, like, you can qualify to get housing in San Francisco once you come back. Oh, the chair of OCII is here. Okay, great. That's great. So they gave these certificates out, but there are quite a few. They embarked on a search to see, who, like if they could find these people a few years ago, and there were so many people that were unable to be found. So that's one route, but we want to be able to find that universe of people so that we at least have some way to contact people who we know have either they or their descendants, like we want to either track the original recipients down or their descendants to be able to offer that to them. And we haven't developed a solid mechanism to do the outreach that we know is necessary to find people who have been displaced, but that's definitely a consideration that we have. And, throughout thinking through different aspects of reparations, the question comes up all the time, like, how do we make sure that, there's different, like, if it's like, oh, you can get a down payment assistance or something like that. Like, do you have to be a San Francisco resident to qualify for that? Or do you have to be buying property in San Francisco to be eligible for it? But things like that. So we haven't developed the actual mechanism yet, but it is something that we're grappling with for sure.
Hey, Juell.
Yes.
Hi, this is Miguel Bustos. I'm the director of the Center for Social Justice. And I also happen to be the chair of OCII. And just to give other people more information about what's happening with that is that Bevette Brackett, who's also on the commission, we made her chair of a committee to look to see how the certificate of preference that originally was given to the Black families that were in the Western Addition could then be passed down. And it was signed into law. So as of last fall, any descendants between now and the end of the world, any descendant will be able to have access to a certificate of preference. So that's one way we're trying to bring folks back. Another was an idea that I actually gave London when she was supervisor, because London was, remember, she was on the redevelopment commission with me back when it was redevelopment. And she and I worked really hard to undo the wrongs of what happened. So that's how the idea of neighborhood preference came about, was we took certificate of preference and said, okay, what about families that have most recently been pushed out? Because here in the Mission District, we have seen a lot of that. And we said, let people who grew up in the neighborhoods still live in the neighborhoods. And so that whole neighborhood preference is another mechanism to give people first dibs to be able to come back. Because the way it had been structured is that if, say, hey, you had just moved into San Francisco last year and you had an LS Act eviction, you got first dibs before people who grew up here and got kicked out. And so we had to redo it so that people who've actually had legitimate, helped build the neighborhoods, built them to have first opportunities of right of return. So there's a couple of mechanisms that exist now that I would encourage people to learn more about. Yeah, it's
awesome.
We need more people to come back. So
that's great. But then the other element of that is, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was saying the other element is not only the people who like are coming to like there's like an outreach element, right? Because I know that there was that study that was done where they couldn't locate like 9,000 of the original applicants or something like that, or the original certificate of preference recipients. So then there's that piece that's like, okay, so how do we get in touch with those people, And I know that I think OCII, correct me if I'm wrong, but OCII is embarking on like a consulting project with that right now, right? OCII sorry, I didn't mean to speak in city acronyms. It's the Office of Community
Investment and Infrastructure.
Okay, cool. It's the successor organization that used to be the redevelopment agency. So thank you for that. And it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here.
And while you're there, I don't know who can answer this question, but also in thinking about how we grapple with the fears that go along with establishing lineage, policing, DNA, and systems. How are, and there's a great question in here, who is from, let's see, this is from Joyce, I think. How are we advising people to track their lineage and research so that they can take advantage of all of this? And I, for one, have not done a 23andMe just because I do not want to be part of a system, even though I'm dying to know what part of Africa I am from. So for people who grapple with that, if we're saying it's a part of lineage, do they have to become part of a larger system that might expose them to other things?
Yes, amazing question. And I can say that is one of my biggest concerns as well. Similar to you, Paula, I'm like, I want to know, but I don't want to necessarily submit to ancestry.com, like, because who knows how that DNA can be used, or sequenced or marketed in the future. So especially with our population who we have a history of being medically exploited in a lot of ways. So I'm not saying that like as a scare tactic, but I'm saying that to add like to the fact that people are don't want to do that. And I think that was a big consideration that came up during that hearing at the California statewide level too. So there was the pro and con kind of sides of the discussion, but ultimately I think they are advising people to either go the route with that, through DNA testing or whatever, but then there's other routes for there's other routes you can do, like tracing your ancestry through different like documentation and things like that. And then I see that Dr. Sai said in the chat that African ancestry specifically speaks to African lineage and protects our DNA. It's Black owned and operated. So that's good to hear about. So the level that the California Commission has done so far with that conversation is they've just said, okay, we're going to go lineage based. They haven't created the mechanism necessarily to do it. So that's still to be determined as well. So, but I think it's going to come down to those, like either like seriously going and looking up those kinds of records or going to through those companies. But now that I know that there's a Black owned and operated option, then maybe I would be more likely to do that. But I think that there's also a challenge with that too, because, and you know, I grapple with it because the challenge is that some of those records don't exist anymore, you know, like sometimes it can be difficult to get, like, I think we take for granted because we live in this day and age that you can access anything anytime. You can like probably look up your birth certificate online or whatever, but we're talking about records of enslaved people. And sometimes, you know, through families change, different dynamics happen, you know. My biggest question is, are we going to be able to find, is everybody who can be traced back to those records going to be able to find that? And that's what I don't know. I'm curious as well.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm glad that was brought up because I feel like that should be a part of the process, or any funding, or like, you know, that should be available to everyone, really honestly at no cost to find that out. I see a question from Will. I know Siobhan and Larry had their hands up. I want to recognize you. The question is, what would be a better option for the Black community? A one-time reparation payment or prolonged suspension of federal and state taxes? I just want to say there's many answers to that question. But as I've been going to the subcommittee meetings for economic empowerment and justice, and that is one of the issues that's being tackled there. So I would invite you to attend those meetings. All of the meetings that have been held are public information. They record them, and you're able to access the city website and view that, or the Reparations Committee website to view that. If you could put your information, your contact information in the chat, that would be great. I'm not sure, Paula, I don't have the agenda or the timeline in front of me. Isn't there a portion where we change over a little bit in the questions, or I'm not sure because I don't see it in front of me.
We've kind of just been doing it organically. So if there are other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, but you recognize a couple people who hadn't spoke yet?
Yeah, Siobhan Wong and then Larry Martin. Siobhan, are you still here?
Are they able to come off mute? I don't know if it's set up for that. If not, go ahead and plug your question into the chat. And
yes, I was sorry. I was just typing my question into the chat. So I'm a certificate of preference holder from the Fillmore district, and although I've attempted to use my certificate a couple of times, but there's a lot of bureaucracy and the developments are very expensive. They're not necessarily affordable. My question is there a list that I do have a son who was not alive at that time? Is there a list or a way that I can, pass that down to him since it's in law? How would I, track that, put him on paperwork or something? Because I was on a list when I went down to the office. There was an actual list that had my information from that time.
I could help answer that. Yes, there's your child can inherit your certificate of preference. It's now state law that it will be passed down. But I would encourage you to check with our staff at OCII, because the units that come available should be affordable. So I know we are getting some folks into it. Now, there are some people that say, oh, I don't want to be in that building. And so that limits, then they have to wait for another unit to come available. But I would hope that please take advantage of it. Because especially if you have it and you'd say you don't want to move to San Francisco or go back to San Francisco, you never know when your descendants would want to come back home. And they should have every right to come back home. And that was the whole design about trying to make sure that you're able to pass that on to future generations, because San Francisco should be their home base. and they should be able to come back.
That's right, Miguel. I have another follow-up question for you. When are the OCII meetings?
They're the first and the third Tuesdays of every month from 1 to sometimes it goes 4, 5. I chair it, so we start right at 1, and we're pretty efficient with the agendas. But we'd love to have members of the public that come and share their comments and concerns.
Thank you, Miguel.
Yeah.
Thank you for your information. I think Larry is next, and then Paula, are there other questions in the chat or other things that have come up? Larry, you're next.
Yes. Yeah, what I want to say, I just wanted to ask, my question is about the payment, because we all know the history. We all know the history of this country. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Then, then they rescinded the 40 acres in the mural, you know what I'm saying? But my main question is the form of payment to Black people. Because my parents, my grandparents, if I trace go back, it's gonna be in Mississippi in the cotton fields, right? So I'm trying to figure out what forms of payment would be that's on the table. Are we talking about monetary payment? Are we talking about housing? Are we talking about land? You know what I'm saying? Are we talking about, what specifically are we talking about? Or are we talking about a wide range of things that's going to be beneficial for Black people? Are we talking about land or states or cities of our own? Because some of us want to separate from the bigotry and the racism. You see what I'm saying? But I understand that, like your parents and our parents grew up in the Baptist church in the South, and right to this day, we still got connections with the Baptist church, which I have no problem with, you know what I'm saying? But my main question is, what are the number 1, 2 things that's going to be included in this reparation things? Are we talking about money? Are we talking about land? Are we talking about something that Siobhan just talked about, housing? What are the core things that's going to be on the table when we're talking about this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Martin. I think that money and housing are definitely big things that will potentially be on the table in the final reparations plan. Whether we really haven't decided exactly how what the payment mechanism or anything like that is. We're not at that stage yet, but housing obviously in San Francisco is a big thing. We're not so much talking about land with regard to this local reparations project, simply because, we only have 7 the city is only but so big, so we haven't really done that. I'm not gonna say it won't be part of it, because if the committee decides that they want that, that will be something. But in addition to cash payments or whatever that looks like, and housing, I think a big one is education is gonna be they're thinking through things about how to change the SFUSD structurally. So these kinds of structural interventions, whether that means creating having new curriculum, introducing that into classrooms at different grade levels, or creating schools that are modeled on the I Promise Academy, the LeBron James thing, things like that. So there's going to be an element of institutional investments and institutional change as well, as well as the housing and monetary considerations.
I think I see one last question before we go to our close. And this is from Will again. And he asked, would it be a better option for the Black community a one-time reparation payment, or is it better for a prolonged suspension of federal and state taxes?
Oh yeah, okay. I'm not gonna say which one is better, because frankly, perhaps both could, I wouldn't exclude both of them being a reality, but so I was thinking through the suspension of taxes problem because I met like a candidate who said that that was part of his platform for reparations. He wanted to instead of doing any cash payment to avoid like any scrutiny that may come from the right or whatever, he wanted to just like suspend taxes. But then I think about that, I'm like, I don't own a house, so I don't pay property taxes. So that wouldn't apply to me. Maybe I guess if like sales tax, if I could show a card and be like, don't charge me sales tax, maybe that would mean something. But I would say that it would be so radically different across like, you know, depending on what you already had access to, that it could be like suspension of taxes as the sole thing could be regressive, like, you know, how they call policy regressive, because it would disproportionately benefit people who had more assets. So if you have like $1 million house and you don't have to pay taxes on it, then that's a benefit. But somebody like me, a renter, like, okay, I don't have to pay taxes on buying a TV or whatever, but then what, you know? So that, you know, so it's those kinds of things would have to be weighed. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that somebody does, and that's the kinds of consultants that we're working with now. And yeah.
So I was going to say, I think that's a great segue into both what Larry and Will are talking about, like how do we get to our next step? So if we could recap, what are our 3 committees that people can engage with? Or actually, the 4th is the larger committee, but what are the 3 committees that folks can get engaged with?
Actually, we do have 4 subcommittees: education, policy, economic empowerment, and health committees. Those are the 4 that you can get involved with.
Right. And what that might mean as you drill down is if you are passionate about one thing or the next, there are going to be these listening parties or focus groups that are coming up, and it will be an opportunity for everyone to engage. And some of them will be holistic and some of them will be more drilled down into a specific specific topic. But Juell, could you please talk a little bit about how folks can engage with what is currently in motion, and then also things that are on the horizon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so please, I would say, so the immediate way that you can engage is please come to the May 9th meeting. That'll be great. If you could come to that. We're sort of like regrouping after April has been sort of a hectic month, so that'll be great. You can always like email either me personally or reparations@sfgov.org, which is me basically, but easier to remember than my name. And yeah, we're still putting together the outreach and engagement like calendar. So it's like kind of TBD right now. But if you email me and you're on the mailing list, if you email me, I can put you on the mailing list, and then you will be notified of those things that are going on as well.
And I can tell you that I know in District 5 and District 6, I'm gonna be helping out with some of those community engagement meetings. So that is on the horizon. We might be coming to your apartment building if everything goes well.
Yeah.
And that said, Freddie, that's going to be part of that will be separate, but then also it's in partnership. And what the Center for Social Justice at GLIDE has done, as well as the GLIDE Racial Justice Group, has made a commitment that in the coming months, through December at the very least, that we will be partnering with local organizations. So if you are part of a local organization, you don't feel like you have the bandwidth or the person power to put on a listening session, reach out to us and we will partner with you to come into that space, whether it be a hybrid space, whether it be an in-person space, or whether it be also just an online space. We are here to support this work full-heartedly. And also, one of the other things is we will be hosting our first listening session that will be for constituents of the Center for Social Justice, as well as GLIDE Memorial Church proper. And The other thing to note is, as we consider what these spaces might look like, you may find that there is an invitation like into tonight's space, where we are inviting people who are not of African descent in as witnesses to witness some of this work, to get the word out. Reparations will not be possible without the support of everyone who lives in the community. The more that we can get this word out to people, whether they be African descendant who need to put input in so that we can dream about what it is that we would like to see. And that's going to vary wildly. I mean, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams for sure. And so we want to have everybody who is still thinking about that 40 acres and a mule, to the folks who are just thinking, I want to get educated without a student loan. Everything in between. We want all of that into these spaces. And so we ask that you tell a friend, each one reach one, but then also don't be offended and be able to explain why sometimes this needs to be a Black space so that we can connect and we can do our work. And then also how you can uplift that as an accomplice as we do this work. Juell, do you have any final thoughts?
That was well said. Thank you, Paula. No, not really. Thank you again for everybody who joined, and the Glide, the Center for Social Justice, and Freddie, Booker T. Washington. I'm just so grateful to be in the space with everybody, and that we were able to have this conversation. There's so many amazing ideas, great questions, and it's been my dream to have these kinds of conversations on this kind of platform about San Francisco. So I'm just really honored to be here and on behalf of the committee.
And thank you for saying that. I got a couple things that I need to acknowledge as well. Guled, thank you for holding it down, all your notes and the Google Docs, and I'm just gonna do whatever needs to be done for making this happen. And you as well, Paula. And I got a special shout out to Linda Mantell as part of the racial justice team. She's been, I don't know if she was acknowledged earlier, but she's, I consider her like a god sister, we're connected, and she's really helped keep me focused. She's gone to many meetings that I haven't been able to go to, and I just really appreciate you and want to acknowledge you. And then Juell actually came up with this checkout question. We don't actually have time to do it. You can type it in the chat, but I really encourage you and want you to think about this question. It's such an excellent question. She didn't know this, but I actually have a project coming up where that is the focus of the group. It's a creative arts group, but the question is, in your wildest imaginings, in your wildest dreams, what does reparations look like to you? And what would that look like? What would that be? So just think about that. And when you have time, jot it down. Like I said, you can put it in the chat if it's coming to you now, but just think about that. And thank you, Glide, for setting this up, and such a great team,
Yay, yes. Thanks for joining us.
All right, so that is our program for tonight. Miguel, do you have any final words before we go out as the director?
All I just want to say is thank you panelists for helping us bring this to everyone's attention. Eric McDonald, you are the best. Thank you for being a leader and a champion for this. Guled, obviously, and Hannah, part of the team. Thank you. Paula, great partnership. This Thursday at 6 p.m., we have another virtual series along with the Center for Social Justice is a virtual series session, and it is on the war on drugs, 51 years of failed policy. So we hope you can meet us on Thursday. It's going to be a different link, but please sign up on Glide Center for Social Justice's website. You'll have more information, but join us. And we do these every month, and be a part of our community, become a justice warrior. And thank you all, and God bless you for all the work everyone is doing. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.